So rZIM has officially released the full report for the accusations against the late apologist Ravi Zacharias. And unfortunately, given the statement that they gave in December, it is no surprise that the results of this 12-page report are absolutely horrendous. And there's two reasons I've decided to make a follow-up video on the allegations against Ravi Zacharias. The first reason is that I made two prior videos regarding the initial statement that rZIM had released in December. And that first video that I released, I said there's three things we can learn from the allegations against Ravi Zacharias, and I got a lot of comments, over 800 comments. And many of the comments refused to believe that he could possibly do this. Many blamed the victims. Many thought the victims were simply out to get money. And so I wanted to make a follow-up video because this new report that is very detailed and specific really answers a lot of these claims that people refuse to believe and helps us make sense of how this much abuse could take place. And really, many said that the women just should have said no, but I think the details in this report will help us to understand why that isn't the case for victims. The second reason I want to make a video on this is that the church must acknowledge, we must talk about these issues. This is arguably one of the greatest scandals in evangelical history. We must be willing to apologize when we have been wrong, when we have refused to believe the victims. And rZIM in their statement has done a very good job of pointing out the areas that they were wrong, the people that they need to apologize to, the ways that they must change, and the church must do the same. We must let victims know we're going to correct the wrongs that we've had. We want to hear their voices. We are going to believe them, and we're going to take accusations seriously and be willing to look into these sorts of allegations, regardless of who the person is that they're levied against. And also the church must consider its posture when it comes to fame and celebrity Christians, with Christians who accumulate tremendous wealth and tremendous power. We've got to warn potential victims for the way that leaders have sought to take advantage and to use their power and to leverage that against them. Now, in this video, I have no intentions of going over the full 12-page report. In this video, I am referencing three specific documents. One, rZIM has made a statement about the report that they released. Two, Christianity Today has put out a lengthy piece going through the report that was released. And three, the actual report itself. All three of these documents, I will put the link in the description. This is where I'm getting all the details that I'm talking about in this video. Now, back in December when rZIM released their initial data and their initial findings, and that was a very short report, but what they said was, we believe the accusations against Ravi Zacharias were credible. Now, when that initial statement was made, I could think of only one reason that rZIM was issuing a statement like that, and that was that they knew that what would be in this final report would be so horrible, it would be so jaw-dropping, shocking, and scandalous that they needed to prepare the way by giving us a little bit of a heads up 2 months before the actual report was released that you better buckle your seatbelts because what's going to be released is going to be atrocious. And unfortunately, that turned out to be true. Now, in my first video, many people said, I refuse to believe this is true. I do not believe that he did any of those things. And a lot of those people I commented and I said, I hope that you are correct. Because if you were correct, that means women were not abused. But unfortunately, the report is out now and it details loads of specific information and specific abuse that has taken place. Ravi Zacharias was arguably the world's most famous apologist. And unfortunately, this report details abuse that has taken place over multiple continents. So the first statement from this report that I want to highlight, rZIM has said, tragically, witnesses described encounters including sexting, unwanted touching, spiritual abuse, and rape. We're devastated by what the investigation has shown. We're filled with sorrow for the women who were hurt by this terrible abuse. Now, this report in general is extremely heartbreaking. To try to actually read all the 12 pages, it really just breaks your heart. Now, in my line of work here with Soulfire, trying to offer gospel hope for a porn-filled world, I go to a lot of conferences that involve trafficking and specifically domestic minor sex trafficking prevention. And so a lot of times I get to speak at conferences like this and talk about how pornography is fueling the demand for trafficking. And in particular, one of the organizations that I work for, Rivers of Justice, is trying to shine a light on the brutality and the heinousness of domestic minor sex trafficking. And when I go to these conferences, my heart will be completely broken. And as I hear some of the pain, some of the horror that children are suffering here in America, here in my area in South Carolina, and every time after these conferences, it will take me days and weeks for my heart to recover, and it will just feel so broken. And that is the same feeling that I get when I read this rZIM report and I see all of the abuse that has taken place, how who we thought was a tremendous leader in the faith community used his power, used his wealth, used his ministry gifting to groom and to abuse dozens and dozens of victims. It is heartbreaking stuff. It's not something that we should take lightly whatsoever. Christianity Today said the 12-page report released Thursday by rZIM confirms abuse by Zacharias at day spas that he owned in Atlanta and uncovers 5 additional victims in the U.S. as well as as evidence of sexual abuse in Thailand, India, and Malaysia. Now, I want to address real briefly the claim that many had made that these victims clearly just wanted money, that they wanted to slander the name of a person of tremendous integrity, and really that their ultimate aim was to get money. Well, this quote from the report itself says, "The overwhelming majority of those we interviewed requested confidentiality and have asked to have their identities kept anonymous." And as far as I'm aware, I don't see one victim that has made this accusation for the purpose of getting money. In fact, the first person who came public after his death, she did so because she watched the funeral. She saw what all these tremendous Christian celebrities were saying about Ravi, and she was abused, and she said, "How can this be that nobody else has seen or heard of these allegations against him?" And she said, "I want to go public with this," because she believed that there were perhaps dozens of other women who had similar experiences and that she could give them the freedom to come forward as well. And it turns out after this investigation, she was correct. So please don't buy the lie that these accusers just wanted money. Most of them wanted to remain anonymous. But then there's this accusation of, well, why don't these women just say no? But this report gives a tremendous amount of information about what the process of grooming really looks like. If you don't understand how abusers use this idea of grooming their victims to prepare them for abuse, this report will help you understand what that is. For example, one therapist reported that Mr. Zacharias spent the first half of their first massage session asking about her spiritual journey and prior abuse. This set her at ease and made her feel that he cared for her as a person before he later asked her to do inappropriate activity. And that is the process of grooming. So here in this report, it talks about how he was giving money to people who were financially destitute, how he was spiritually ministering and counseling and drawing these women out and getting them to a place of trust before he would push the boundaries and take advantage and abuse them. This is the process of grooming. Many people don't understand how children can get abused and how it's usually somebody that they trust that they will allow to abuse them. How does that happen? Well, for a child, they cannot understand that this person is preparing and building their trust so that they can take advantage of them. And here that seems to be the exact same case as well. One of the abuse victims who worked at a spa said the following: "I never said anything because who would believe me against a famous Christian leader?" And so here we have not only the process of grooming, but then we have the fact that he had such power, prestige, such wealth, and such fame that these women who were essentially, like me, they were nobodies, and they said, "Who would ever believe me against this tremendous person of influence and power?" Well, Christianity Today said even a limited review of Zacharias' old devices revealed contacts from more than 200 massage therapists in the US and Asia, and hundreds of images of young women, including some that showed the women naked. Zacharias solicited and received photos until a few months before his death in May 2020 at age 74. So a large part of this report had to do with them combing through his old digital devices, because the original claim in 2017 by the couple from Canada, whose last name were the Thompsons, was that he had engaged in inappropriate texting and was requesting pictures from her, and rZIM denied that. Ravi denied it. He tried to explain it away. He said he needed to be more careful and blah, blah, blah. Now that they have his devices, and apparently Zacharias was carrying around 2 to 3 phones at any given time. So he had these burner phones in which he had no accountability with, and he was using that to keep his digital life secret. But here's what rZIM has now said about that case in 2017 with the Thompsons. "The investigation's conclusion have caused us to think very differently about the allegations Miss Lori-Ann Thompson made against Ravi in 2017. We were wrong. Our trust in Ravi's denial of moral wrongdoing and his deceptive explanation of emails and other records that became public was severely misplaced. And our failures in 2017, including our failure to commission an independent investigation at that time, allowed tremendous pain to continue to be caused in the Thompsons' lives." And so now they need to go back and correct the fact that the Thompsons were thrown under the bus, that they were accused of many things, that Ravi used his fame and his power to really deny these accusations that were against him. But one of the big takeaways from a report like this for any of us in ministry, to anybody of tremendous influence in ministry, is to ask the question of accountability. Are we having accountability in our lives? So the rZIM statement said this: "We regret that we allowed our misplaced trust in Ravi to result in him having less oversight and accountability than would have been wise and loving." So they're trying to own up to the fact that for decades they allowed him to kind of choose his own adventure of accountability. The report itself specifically details he was the architect of his own accountability, and therefore he knew how to get around it. Christianity Today said it also shows the ministry provided little or no accountability for its namesake and for its founder. And this to me is what doesn't make any sense as you look back. Going back to the early 2000s, he was investing in spas. He was staying in spas all by himself for long periods of time, hours and hours alone in these rooms of spas, getting massages, and being alone with women. He was putting himself in terrible positions that should have been questioned, but unfortunately, given his verbiage and given his reputation, these things were never questioned. And those who did question him, including in 2009, the first spa employee who made an accusation against him, well, she was actually fired. And so it really wasn't a safe place for people to come out and to question his credibility. So the church must be humbled by this scandal. Any of us who are in ministry, are we asking these questions? Are we allowing people into our lives to give us accountability? Are we living with checks and balances in our life? And it simply reminds me of the need in my own life to have other men and women in my life who can hold me accountable. We need accountability desperately. And I'm reminded of the phrase that I quoted in the first video with Ravi from one of my favorite authors, Jerry Bridges, where Jerry would always say with a scandal like this, "But for the grace of God, so go I." So can all of us in the church, as we look at what could be the greatest scandal in evangelical history, what can we learn? What can we take away? How can we be sure that we don't go the same route in the same direction? Well, Dan Patterson, who's the former head of rZIM in Australia, had this to say. He said, "I feel a profound sense of fear of the Lord, knowing that one day I too will give an account, where like the rZ report, everything done under the shroud of darkness will be made known. Jesus comes to restore justice through judgment. Oh, how I wish Ravi had repented here." And here's a tremendous takeaway for all of us. Each and every single one of us must give an account to God. Romans 14:12 says, "Then each one of us will give account of himself to God." There must come a time where all of us take a moment to say, you and I are mortal. We will stand before the living God, where he will judge the hidden and the visible things. We must give an account. This is a time when the church desperately needs gospel hope. Here on this channel, I try to offer gospel hope for a porn-filled world, and a scandal like this simply reminds me how much more must we take seriously the desire to be accountable for what we look at online, the desire to be accountable for our lives, and the world for these victims. All of us need gospel hope. So this video has been an extremely sad one to report any of these details. As I mentioned before, links to the 3 articles that I'm referencing are in the description. This is Jason for Soulfire. Here we want to bring gospel hope for a porn-filled world. And I want to remind you that living in sexual integrity is possible. And a story like this shows us, it isn't easy, but the truths of the scripture, the fact that there is gospel hope, shows us that living in integrity is possible. I'll catch you in the next one.